Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Hello. Thanks for joining us. If you're interested in the latest evolutionary knowledge from today's leading experts, Mission Evolution is the place to be. This hour, among other things, we'll be exploring consciousness, dreams, and UFOs. Evolution of consciousness can take some radical twists and turns, leading down multiple rabbit holes as one reality shatters, giving way to another. With us this hour to dance with the multifaceted nature of reality is Richard Grossinger. Richard is the author of over 40 books, including Dreamtimes and Thought Forms, From the Big Bang to Octopus and Crow Intelligence to UFOs. He attended Amherst College and the University of Michigan, receiving a BA in English and a PhD in anthropology. With his wife Lindy, Richard is the co-founding publisher of North Atlantic Books. His works include a series of titles on holistic medicine, cosmology, embryology, and consciousness. He's currently the curator of the Sacred Planet book imprint at Inner Traditions International. His website, richardgrossinger.com. Richard, thanks for once again joining us on Mission Evolution.
Yeah, thank you. This is our second time. We did a show on bottoming out the universe, maybe couple of years ago.
Yes, it seems like it was about 2 years ago. So a lot of your work, including bottoming out the universe, deals with reality. How did you first become interested in the nature of reality?
Well, I think everyone is. I mean, especially it's something that particularly fascinates one as a child, as they kind of wonder about the world around them and are still enmeshed in fairy tales and kind of magical beliefs. And then as you get older, you kind of lose that. And for me, the inquiry began in college. Well, probably began before that. But a particular version of it began when I began visiting a salon by the Hudson River where poets and artists gathered to discuss metaphysical and psycho-spiritual topics. And Lindy, my wife-to-be, and I would go there as students. And it was apart from our college curriculum. And that led to my adopting the genres of writing that they were doing, which was experimental prose. For me, it was experimental prose. They were poets for the most part. And all the topics were entangled together the way they are in poems. And it was only some 10, 15 years later that I began sorting out the topics. And I wrote Planet Medicine for Doubleday. I wrote The Night Sky for Sierra Club. And I wrote Embryogenesis for Avon, all of which books I redid later under what was then my own imprint. And then I'd been studying cranial sacral therapy in the late 80s, early 90s, and I bridged over to psychic work. And I realized that there was a continuity between them, and that the same type of energy field you were working with in cranial sacral therapy, you were working with off body and the subtle body in psychic healing. And at the same time, I began reading scientific and philosophical works on consciousness because an editor at MIT Press just gave me a book that they had published. I think it was 30 articles on the nature of consciousness. And I realized that the psychic view of consciousness, the metaphysical view, and the scientific philosophical view came right up to each other and crossed without meeting. The half the people writing on consciousness from a scientific standpoint concluded that they had no idea what it was. that could not be explained in terms of knowledge of physics, biology, the nervous system. You could explain how it functioned, but you couldn't explain what it was. And yet that didn't suggest to them that there was another like plane or frequency on which consciousness was coming. Whereas in the psychic work, in the psychic training, that's where you started. You presumed that your own conscious consciousness was the tip of the iceberg. And not only was the Freudian unconscious and the Jungian collective unconscious informing you without your being aware of it, but you were also in this greater field of energies, information, transmissions, and that your whole existence was, in a sense, supported by a consciousness which was quite independent of your biological consciousness and the neuroscience explaining it. So I did at that time write a series of books on that I called Dark Pool of Light, 3 volumes on that, on reality and consciousness, and then later bridged into writing Bottoming Out the Universe and Dreamtimes and Thought Forms. And all along, I don't think it's like a koan. The more you meditate on it, the more it opens up. And at this point, I feel as though between the two arguments that that the universe begins as matter and then consciousness evolves out of it sort of algorithmically, and the argument that the universe begins as consciousness and matter is a projection of consciousness, it's a collective projection of multiple entities combining their thought forms to create matter.
So couldn't that both be true? I know there's a proven
They are both true.
mathematically proven formula that says manifestation is equal parts past and future, but only happens in the present. Seems like that lines up with that.
That's another kind of rubric to use for it. But I feel as though they are both true. Years ago, I had an illustrator for one of my embryology books make an illustration of a kind of Steinerite of like spirit descending and matter ascending to meet it. And the algorithmic view is really that matter has its own nature. And as it evolves, probably algorithmically, as science proposes, Darwinian, Newtonian, and Darwinian science, at the same time, spirit inhabits its evolving form, and the two come together.
Would you take a second to define spirit as you're using it here?
I wonder, how am I using it here? There are a number of choices. So why a one-word choice? I think I chose spirit because it's particularly broad. I mean ourselves and everything that informs us at a higher frequency or on a subtler plane of consciousness.
So that's what you're using as spirit.
Yeah, spirit is our greater self, for which Gwilda and Richard are just like temporary deputies who have taken on these shapes in order to participate in this zone of creation.
Okay. So what is reality? What is this reality we're in?
Well, I think whatever I say, I'll think something different tomorrow and in 6 months and so forth. But today, I really think about I think a lot about the notion of a collective thought form. That the reason why when science looks through a microscope and then gets finer and finer down through quarks and preons and curvature strengths, I'm just throwing this out, but the smaller things, ultimately it becomes transparent and there's nothing there. I So there's a good argument for the fact that that reality, the real world, is a form of a lucid dream, and that I don't think that it's just a mirage that we're projecting, but it has elements of being shaped by our thought, and not individually so much as collectively. And that means everything. It means the things which then manifest as plants, as simple animals, as more complex animals, and as, for that matter, as rocks, as stars. There are all these kind of frequencies coming together to produce a world which is very believable and very powerful and very John Friedlander, the psychic I've studied most, likes to call it meaningful. He says it's not real, but it's meaningful, and that science has it backwards when it says it's real but meaningless. It's actually not real but very meaningful, and that
So is it allegorical?
No, I mean you could use that language, but I don't think of it as allegorical. I think of it as a direct writing of the soul or spirit onto a kind of medium in which it can express itself.
So with that, thinking of it that way, we have the collective writing, if you will, of all the people participating at this time in this particular reality. And then underneath that, or as a subset, we have the individual writing. Am I on track here?
Yeah, but whatever model we make is always going to be far less than it is, because it in itself is beyond our comprehension how it functions. But we make models to at least get us out of sort of stale, habitual ways of thinking. The other pathway to it, which I write about a lot in this book we're talking about, Dream Times and Thought Forms, is I kind of address the Buddhist sort of analysis of reality. It's the most sophisticated. I find it the most sophisticated, especially the Tibetan Buddhist version. But I feel as though in popular Buddhism, that gets translated into the notion that this reality is in some way flawed and is meant to be transcended. I don't think that that's the message of Buddhism, but it does become the practical kind of function of it, which is to get people to drop their ego awareness and move into a higher form of consciousness. And I would simply make the point, and I have like various people I've debated this with who really, we've converged on this notion. My friend, psychologist Matt McKay, likes to put it, this reality has to be accounted for. That is, it's not sufficient to say we've gotten ourselves in a kind of an illusion or a flawed reality or something that we have to transcend. I think we've gotten ourselves into the reality that we're supposed to be in right now, and that part of practice, part of spiritual practice, is to accept the terms of this reality. And in many,
we're going to have to go into accepting the terms of this reality on the other side of a station break. Richard and I will return shortly, so don't go away. This is just getting interesting. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org.
Beautiful Mind Coffee is delicious coffee your brain will love. Made with ethically sourced 100% Arabica coffee grown in the volcanic soil of the Tolima, Colombia region, Beautiful Mind coffee is roasted and ground in small batches to ensure each bag contains a wonderful full-bodied artisan coffee. Beautiful Mind coffee contains herbal ingredients to aid in boosting your daily mental clarity and focus. Maca root powder, green tea extract and American ginseng have all been selected for their ability to support good brain health. Taking care of your brain's health now can help delay or prevent the onset of cognitive dysfunction, including dementia, Alzheimer's, and more general memory loss as you get older just by enjoying the delicious flavor of our roasted coffee and herbal ingredients found exclusively in Beautiful Mind coffee. For more information on Beautiful Mind coffee, visit us online at www.beautifulmindcoffee.ca. Beautiful Mind coffee is now available at amazon.ca.
Hello again. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us this hour discussing the many faces of reality is Richard Grossinger. His website, richardgrossinger.com. Richard, we were getting into Buddhism, reality, and consciousness. So would you continue with that and help me understand the relationship between reality and consciousness?
Well, I don't know that it's the relationship between reality and consciousness that we're actually talking about. We're talking about consciousness and how it shapes our experience of existence. And then that we're calling, I guess that would be reality. But I'm not ultimately that interested in these distinctions or splitting hairs around them, because it's kind of interesting to a point, but ultimately what's more interesting is the forms we make in the world and what kind of lives we live. It reminds me, who was it? Can't remember which philosopher, although I have it written down, that reality is an experience. It's something to be experienced, not a riddle to be solved. It's because we can't solve it. We're not gonna solve it as a riddle. But there's so many wonderful manifestations and also so many terrible manifestations, and the relationship between them engages us. I mean, we have to look at just terrible behavior by human beings, probably shown to an extreme by what's happening in Ukraine, and then also beautiful, exquisite visions and works and like acts of compassion and awareness by people, and the contrast between the two within the same reality is in some ways it more calls for our attention than figuring out what the reality is. And it sort of tells us something about that reality. I think what it tells us, for one, is that there is a darkness and a density that has to be illuminated. And that part of what our experience is to use our lives in some way, some way that we're drawn, in order to bring a kind of light or some honest aspect of our own presence to the kind of crossed energies and sort of the terrible and frightening aspects of reality.
Well, we've had both in existence as long as there's been recorded history, the light and the dark, the good and the bad. I mean, a photograph isn't a photograph if you don't have contrast, which requires the light and the dark. So within that, what is our purpose?
Well, I could throw it back on you, but I'm supposed to be answering the questions on the show.
I
I
appreciate
think it's
that.
a very individual thing. Um, I naturally sort of run from the notion that there is a general purpose that can be assigned to everyone, because that begins to look like a religion, and then a religion begins to look like a cult, and a cult begins to look like a power structure with a guru.
Right. I was trying to refer to as individuals. We each have a different one, obviously.
Yeah, I tend to see things very individually, and I've mused about. I've been teased at times in more recent years of like, well, you're on the spectrum, which I think is true. Many of the people I'm close to, I realize, well, it's because we're kind of ragged in our approach to things. And my wife isn't, though, which is interesting that we've been together such a long time and we're different on that. She's very grounded in a particular reality, very deeply grounded in it, and finds a lot of my thinking to be sort of interesting for a time, but she'd rather get on with the thing she's doing and so forth. And many people are that way. And then there are other people who um, kind of, without being, I think the danger is in it moving towards narcissism. You somehow have to skirt narcissism, and at the same time realize that your own experience is your teaching. My experience is more my teaching than anything I write, but I try and write as close to that experience as I can. So a lot of my writing is much of my unpublished writing that I'm going to try and get out in the next year or two is from a very personal standpoint, and does tell stories. Like it's part of my own quest that my mother, brother, and sister all committed suicide. When you go through that process with them, and I was brought up in the same household. I did have another family, but I didn't meet them until I was 9, and I was pretty indoctrinated by then. So how do I mediate? I have the same energies that were in them. How do I work with those energies in such a way that they don't destroy me, so that they're creative? And then how do I also reach out to other people who um, who then can respond to what I've discovered, who are working with forms with the same energies? That's a very big part of my experience, but it's not so much in how I talk about consciousness, but it was given to me. I mean, that I was put in that situation. You could argue, and sometimes I think maybe it's true, that as a soul's plan kind of thing, that I chose, that's what I chose. And then in
So
the
is the act of reframing that and transmuting it rather than following the old pattern, is that part of what you would say is purpose?
um, I think that the purpose is to take the darkness that you're given and to see and to transform that. But you can't do it as an exercise. You have to do it as an act of conscious desire, and you have to be pulled towards it, called towards it. It's not an exercise. It has to be a lived reality.
I don't understand the difference. Could you clarify that a little bit, between
Well,
exercise and
well, for many people, spiritual practice is an exercise. Um, you you do it like going into, even if you don't belong to a church, you do it as like going into a church that you create in your own mind, and you do the practice. And I don't see anything wrong with that. And I have many close friends whose lives are really guided by that. But that's not so much true for me. Although I've done practices, I've never settled on any particular one or committed myself to it. I've more tried to respond to the thread of challenges as they come up.
So
And
like the living of it versus the practice.
mhm. But not,
Okay.
and in that book, Dreamtimes and Thought Forms, I have a whole section on practice in which I point out that if you don't have any practice, it's really difficult to do it just by the living of it. That the practice, you internalize the practice. And when you internalize the practice, then it kind of serves you as you try and live your life.
So the practice gives you the vehicle in which to live your life, to experience it through living.
I would more say that you internalize the practices and they become part of you in such a way that you refer to them somewhat naturally. They're there.
So if that then takes us back to what you were saying about Buddhism, how does that relate?
I was using that as an example because it presents a contrast. The Buddhist writings, and there's a bunch of them, really wonderful ones I'm dealing with, a part of my role within the traditions to get these teachings out in a more popular form of this particular Tibetan Dzogchen teacher. And I've been thinking a lot about how powerful the writings and teachings are, but I'm contrasting that to the kind of, I don't know, what would I call it? It's my local friend here in Bar Harbor who teaches Zen and stuff refers to it as, I think he rewrites the poem, the sort of nursery rhyme. There was a crooked man who lived in, had a crooked sixpence, and he just puts the word Buddhist in it. And he had a Buddhist cat and a Buddhist wife, and they all lived together in a little Buddhist house. And he uses that to say that although he's a Buddhist practitioner, he doesn't think of himself as a Buddhist, and he kind of shies away from that as an imposed practice. And I'm wrestling with that myself because I've at numerous points in my life tried to do Buddhist practice and wasn't able to do it. And I just watched the documentary last night of Leonard Cohen's life and the time that he went to the Zen Center and really, really dug into it for I forget how long, but a significant period during which he cleared his lifelong depression. And that's really significant work. That's like really hard. That's core work, hardcore work, and core work. And I have total respect and admiration, and sometimes even like I wouldn't call it jealousy as so much as regret that I don't exactly do that myself. But then I do a process where I internalize that and I try and stay awake to that all the time.
So if we put this, we're about out of time in this segment, but if we put it back in a nutshell, I'm still not real clear on the difference or the progression between the practice and the living.
I don't know that we want to put it in a nutshell, but we can save that for your next segment.
Well, we do have a little more time in this segment.
We do have a
Yes,
little
we
more
do.
time. Okay. Well,
I'm just trying to understand, and I don't yet.
I wouldn't tend to. I don't know that understanding it is all that important. It's a conversation, and so some people will react to it and resonate with it, and other people won't exactly follow or understand it. I'm talking from my own experience that I don't think I could have gotten to where I've gotten without doing various practices along the way. And in that book, Dreamtimes and Thought Forms, actually lists them. But when I myself had a long depression, none of the practices helped. You could say, well, you didn't do them thoroughly enough or well enough, but without them, I would have been lost too, because they gave me compasses, and they gave me like foundations to draw on. And yet there was something else, something subtler and deeper that I was looking for as a guide. And that's I mean, I don't want to overemphasize that one viewpoint. I'm merely taking the view that what's interesting about spirit and practice and magic and metaphysics is the individual expression of it.
Well, we're going to have to pick up on that on the other side of this commercial break. Richard and I will be right back to continue this fascinating discussion, so stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org.
So I was watching the X Zone TV channel last night when I was abducted by aliens, and they kept repeating to me over and over again, simultv.com, simultv.com.
What's simultv.com?
That's what I asked them. They had it written on the side of their UFO.
How do you spell that?
UFO.
No, I mean simultv.com.
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 Right. simultv.com.
Interesting that you were abducted by aliens in a simultv.com UFO last night.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Now that you mention it, I remember now last night I was awakened from a deep sleep. My great-grandmother was standing there. She said she'd come from the hereafter to tell me about simultv.com. She even spelled it out for me.
simultv.com, sonny boy.
simultv.com.
simultv.com, sonny boy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Guys, you'll never guess what my psychic guru just told me.
simultv.com.
Exactly. Are you guys psychic too?
Of course.
We all know about simultv.com. simultv.com.
Hi there. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. Our guest this hour is Richard Grossinger. His website, richardgrossinger.com. Richard, let's change gears just a little bit here because I don't want to end this interview without asking you. I'm really fascinated. What do UFOs have to do with all of this?
It's good you asked, because I was telling Gwilda before that bad timing. There were carpenters working on our porch, and I had to tell them to leave while I did this because we couldn't have the hammering. And we've been waiting for the cold, deep freeze to end and them to be able to work. And I explained I was doing a podcast, and they wanted to know on what. And I mentioned UFOs, and they were, where is it? We want to listen to it. And so I wasn't necessarily hoping before that we got to the topic, but now that they want to listen to it, it's good we got to the topic, and that I at least was honest about that, about what we're going to be talking about. A lot of my thinking about UFOs recently has been the fact that I'm helping in a loose way Keith Thompson work on the rewrite of his 1990s, early 1990s book that was, I think, called Aliens and Archetypes. And way back then, I was in a conference with him called Aliens, Angels, and Archetypes, or something like that. And I hadn't really been in touch with him since, which is more than 30 years. But he's redoing that book under the title Cosmos Calling. And so we've talked continuously about UFOs for the last maybe year and a half. And I guess I'll give you the conclusion rather than any of the other details, because Well, I think it's interesting maybe to start there so you don't have to work up to it. And I've written, I mean, in The Night Sky, I have a 100-page chapter on UFOs, and I've written about them in many places. And yet I would come down to, with Keith finally concluding that we don't know what they are, that any discussion of them as interstellar ships is probably wrong. That's probably not what they are. And I was in 2021, I was in a conference at MIT about the methods of propulsion used to get between star systems. And all of these I was the only non-physicist there, and all of them believed in interstellar travel, but couldn't imagine the mechanism. And there were all sorts of mechanisms put forth for how it could be done. But obviously, it's a tall task because we can't even get to the end of our own solar system without using up most of the lifetime of anybody doing it. And to get to another star system goes way beyond the lifetime. It goes way beyond the whole period of history and prehistory by present propulsion to get to another planet.
But how about the moving of consciousness versus the moving of the physicality?
Yes, but one of the things about UFOs is that they do leave debris. But then that brings us back to what is reality, what is concrete and what isn't.
I'm sorry, would you tell me about the debris?
Well, I haven't handled it myself, but everybody I trust, the major UFO investigators, have gone and collected what material has come from UFO sites. And there is, I think there's pretty good evidence that there's been debris from where UFOs have landed or crashed, and that it's not anything that was made by terrestrial technology. It's not. It involves, I guess, isotopes of atoms that we don't use. Again, you have to know where is the information, where does the information end, and where does the disinformation begin? Or is it all information, or is it all disinformation? I mean, in
other words, there really is no proof at this point.
There's no proof. Well, there is proof that something is happening. There's a phenomenon that shows up on radar that is experienced widely by huge numbers of people planet-wide. But what it is, there's a tendency to assign it to extraterrestrials and space travel. But early on, Jacques Vallée pointed out that it equally fits fairies and brownies and other figures of myth. And then if you think about that in more recent times, you could make the argument that that there really is a kind of lesion in reality, if we want to go back to reality, at least how we think of reality. And the UFOs are are showing us the edge of some totally different area of manifestation. In some other aspect of the universe is like peeking through. And in the book, I make a list of all the possibilities I can think of for what might be peeking through and how it's peeking through. But if that's the case, none of these models will solve it, especially the interstellar spacecraft model. And insofar as sentient beings have gotten off the spacecraft and communicated with people, those are not necessarily beings from other planets. They could be beings from other dimensions, you talk about different time frames. They could represent bends in time. There are all sorts of other possibilities beside the idea that they're starships. Um,
Well, isn't the interstellar travel and the UFOs and the starships idea, isn't that more a modern rendition of the things that we were responding to as angels and demons and messengers back in
yeah,
biblical times?
yes, although that doesn't mean that there couldn't have been starships at all points. I was struck recently by a really powerful quote from William Shatner after he had had this very short expedition into space. And he remarked that for all the adventures of Star Trek and all the planets visited and dimensions crossed, when he actually took a look at space, I'm paraphrasing, it looked awfully dark and cold and empty, and that all the worlds of Star Trek were actually on Earth.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that the UFOs, to me, just my gut feeling is that UFOs are arising within the Earth reality, not coming from outside it.
Oh, would you go into that just a little deeper for us, Richard?
Um, well, I don't have any information. I mean, I could extrapolate on it. Um, the We don't have any real knowledge of what's going on in other solar systems or galaxies, solar systems in this galaxy and in other galaxies. Um, th- they're they're like a secret, and we don't have any tools that can really open that secret. On the other hand, there are very mysterious things manifesting right here, and things suggesting that we are participating and engaged in a much bigger universe. Um, and Too bad that there's a phone having to come in, but
Is
I
that the way
guess,
you're engaging in another universe there, right?
yeah. And it's usually spam. These,
Yeah, of course.
um, so I that's just the kind of view I would take of it. That that
So
Go ahead.
when we're talking, when we started talking about consciousness, and you were talking about the energetic field that surrounds us, and how information is exchanged there. Do you think that there's an exchange of information through energetic means from outside in the galaxy?
I do. It's, I do. It's part of also John Friedlander's model of things. I did put together a book of I did other books, another book with him, but I put together a book of his writings, some of them channeled writings called Recentering Seth that came out last year. I don't know if you've had him on your show, maybe not, because
I'm not sure. I don't think so.
but he makes the argument that not only are we constantly communicating with other entities throughout all that is, but that we are unconsciously engaged in each other's existences and help and supporting each other's existences, and that there is a kind of unity consciousness there, just like gravity is one, consciousness is one, and we're all linked through it and participating with each other.
Well, you speak of dreams. Is some of that happen in our dream time?
Well, I distinguish between dreams and dream time in the book. The dream time I leave to the Australian Aborigine vision of the sort of imagine. It's a kind of thought form, the way the singing of the people and the working of like supernatural forces bring the whole landscape into being. And then there are dreams. I recently had a new author come onto in Inner Traditions, a psychiatrist in Detroit, who's going to do a dream oracle deck. And he said something which is totally obvious, but I never exactly thought it in just this way before, which is that dreams are they're these deliveries of esoteric information just naturally. Everybody gets them, and they're like as complicated and divinatory as a tarot deck or tarot card reading. They provide incredibly deep information about our lives that we're living at the moment.
Do they also provide, as we were speaking, detailed information about other lives, of other connections, of even outside of our planet?
I think so, but we often can't tell where one starts and another, where one ends and another starts. I have my own feelings about dreams I've had. There are dreams I've had that don't really seem from this world.
Hmm.
A psychologist would say, "Oh, well, that's just that's just another form of what's happening on this world." But I see them. They don't feel to me that way. It's just a matter of dead reckoning. It's not. I don't have any evidence, and I think that there's so many. I also think dreams are subject to limitless interpretations.
Isn't
Uh,
that the beauty of them,
yeah.
that they are so multidimensional?
Yeah, the Freudian interpretation is accurate, but so is the Jungian one.
Hmm.
And then so is the indigenous one. Indigenous peoples do treat dreams as realities. And so do in this book, that's the Dzogchen book, there's a whole section on the bardo of dreaming.
Hmm.
There's the bardo of waking life and the bardo of dreaming and the bardo of afterlife. And and each of these is a kind of separate cohesive realm of existence. And when we're in a dream, generally we don't know we're dreaming. And even if we do, even if it's a lucid dream.
We're going to have to go into lucid dreaming on the other side of a station break. So please stay with us. Richard and I will continue to explore the cosmos. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org.
Beautiful Mind Coffee is delicious coffee your brain will love. Made with ethically sourced 100% Arabica coffee grown in the volcanic soil of the Tolima, Columbia region, Beautiful Mind Coffee is roasted and ground in small batches to ensure each bag contains a wonderful full-bodied artisan coffee. Beautiful Mind Coffee contains herbal ingredients to aid in boosting your daily mental clarity and focus. Maca root powder, green tea extract and American ginseng have all been selected for their ability to support good brain health. Taking care of your brain's health now can help delay or prevent the onset of cognitive dysfunction, including dementia, Alzheimer's, and more general memory loss as you get older just by enjoying the delicious flavor of our roasted coffee and herbal ingredients found exclusively in Beautiful Mind Coffee. For more information on Beautiful Mind Coffee, visit us online at www.beautifulmindcoffee.ca. Beautiful Mind Coffee is now available at amazon.ca.
Welcome back. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. Our guest this hour is Richard Grossinger. His website, richardgrossinger.com.
Grossinger.
Yes, Grossinger. It's been one of those days, Richard. So we were talking about dreams and reality, and we were getting into lucid dreaming. So would you continue with lucid dreaming?
It's not a big topic for me because I don't have many lucid dreams, and yet I know people who do. I guess I messed up my hair and running out, running back. Um, the in the book, in Dreamtimes and Thought Forms, I give a long example of a lucid dream in which I am working out a set of problems in the dream. That's often how a lucid dream is to me. Sometimes, under very extreme circumstances, I'll have a lucid dream. Um, you mentioned that once upon a time, Lindy and I were co-founders of North Atlantic Books, and yet that was taken over. We, after 50 years of it being our press, it was taken over by a group, and we were
Well,
canceled.
Richard, unfortunately, we are out of time, so we are going to have to close out. But I have to thank you so much for coming on the show.
Okay.
Our guest this hour has been Richard Grossinger, the author of over 40 books, including Dreamtimes and Thought Forms, From Big Bang to Octopus and Crow Intelligence and UFOs. His website, richardgrossinger.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy past archived episodes, visit www.missionevolution.org. Please be sure to join us right here next time as this mission continues, bringing information, resources, and support to an evolving world.